Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to ZTV Live. Today is Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. Happy to have you all here tonight, and I am thrilled to welcome back our guest host, Mr. Paul Dean, Esquire. He's going to be talking about some legal matters about neighbors and property and where rights begin and end. I was just remembering when my husband and I first moved into a previous house, we were so excited to start. We had one baby, another one on the way. We bought this really cute little brick house, and we were so excited about the neighborhood. And we got onto the street that day, and the Mount Vernon Gazette had a cover story of these horrible teens that they were vandalizing everything, and those teens lived on our street. And we were like, what? When? Why didn't we ever know about this? It was crazy. So maybe we'll start, and I'll ask Paul what to do about that. So, Paul Dean, welcome to Legal Matters on ZTV Live.
Thanks, Susan. It's great to be here as always.
Good. Yes. Well, we'd love to have you.
Patrick's Day, a day
That's
early.
right. Happy St. Patrick's Day a day early as well, to you and to everybody else out there. Of course, my issue ended up going away when we moved in. There was that headline, and I think there was a cranky neighbor in the neighborhood who had kind of had it, and maybe his pleas to the family fell on deaf ears about the kids leaving garbage in the neighborhood and being loud at night and their loud cars. And by the time fall came around, most of them went to college, and it was a moot point, and the issue went away. So
Maybe it's a good thing you didn't have next door.
yeah, yeah,
time.
exactly.
That.
Yeah, next door was really just literally next door. Everybody just complaining to their neighbors in the street rather than, typing like a crazy cat.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, welcome, and I know that this is something that you've dealt with professionally as well as personally. I would imagine as an attorney, you have people kind of come up to you like, I got this neighbor and they're always doing this. What can I do? Is that kind of how you got the idea for this month's show?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is a show I've been looking forward to doing for a while. It's very topical, I think, since we're all neighbors and we live in an area that generally, 99.9% of everyone, gets along pretty well, and hopefully you're living peacefully and enjoying your home and the right to use your property how you see fit. But unfortunately, as always happens from time to time, disputes do rise. Usually, it has to deal with the use of one's property, or it could have things to do with noise or light or encroaching vegetation or roaming water or just the case of the nudist next door who just causing a stir. So there's all kinds of wacky scenarios out there that just really sort of get people upset. And so oftentimes of course people approach me and say, hey, what can I do here? What are my rights? Should I sue my neighbor? And so I thought today we'd kind of explore some of the issues that arise and take a look at a little bit about where the laws are and what the sources of the law are, what your rights are, and really explore the question of sort of what to do when a neighbor is annoying you, and really sort of ask the question, should I sue? Is it worth the risk and the time and the expense? And it's a risk reward prospect a lot of times, and can lead to problems down the road. But there are situations where if your rights are as a property owner are really being trampled, sometimes you have no recourse, and you have every legal right to seek either injunction or monetary damages for the unlawful acts of your neighbors.
Well, that's a very fancy way to say, yeah, sue the pants off of them, because you've exhausted all other avenues. You've approached them, you've appealed to them. Sometimes a homeowners association can maybe help settle disputes as well, if that happens to be the case. But especially if it's causing real undue harassment or harm to you. I mean, some issues are just difficult to ignore, and it's frustrating I guess trying to deal with the neighbor who's not, who your pleas fall on deaf ears, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's I think in these situations it's important to know sort of where the law comes from. Where do things originate? And in Virginia, like many of the states across the United States, sort of the laws that dictate sort of how one can use their property goes back to the English common law, back that was developed in the Middle Ages and sort of brought over here by the first colonists. And a lot of those principles, still are sort of standard today. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, it's very much a property owner's state as far as, the laws really favor, the property owner being able to pretty much do what they want to do on their own property as long as it's reasonable and doesn't really infringe on an adjacent property owner's ability to sort of enjoy their own property. So really, a lot of it comes down to that reasonableness standard.
Right.
In a lot of cases, you'll find there are sort of bright line tests that are found in case law. So that's kind of the first overarching sort of source of the laws as they pertain to how you deal with property issues with neighbors. But then there's a lot of other sets of laws that deal with very specific type situations. The next is the Virginia Code. So there are statutes on the books that deal with a lot of different situations as well. They get very specific. Then there are also local ordinances. So we live in Fairfax County or City of Alexandria or whatever your jurisdiction is. Particularly when it comes to things like noise and property use and easements and things like that. You have to look to the local laws and ordinances. From there, you also have to deal with a lot of property around here. There are what we call restrictive covenants. So when neighborhoods were platted back, around here, mostly in the 50s and 60s, each neighbor sort of, entered into a covenant that dictated sort of things like, how far back, a fence has to be from the property line and how high it can be, and, how high a house can be, and
How big a sign can be.
how big a sign can be. So, and the question is, though, with those covenants, are they enforceable? And a lot of times, I find that they're not really enforceable unless they've been consistently forced in the neighborhood over the years. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. And really, the other, and then even the more narrow situation that you get is, of course, if you're in a homeowners association, and if you move into a neighborhood, or condos or something like that, or a condo association. They have, you've entered into sort of more of a contractual agreement that you'll abide by sort of the rules of the homeowners association, or you're liable for penalties there. So there really is sort of a wide range of laws and ordinances and rules, things like that are out there.
And it's and I wonder if you I don't know if they take precedence in the order that you presented them, but it'll be interesting to know. But I do want to say, before we kind of get into your beginning, I want to tell everybody, we already have a couple of great questions. Marilyn Kopach, thank you so much, Marilyn. We always appreciate your
Marilyn.
Questions in the show, and Mary Wadlin. But I want to encourage all viewers, if you have any questions at all for Paul, go ahead and type it in the comment box. And if we get to it tonight, fantastic. And if not, Paul will follow up with you. So, but we do want this to be a conversation. I think everybody is going to have some questions as Paul presents his information. So, did you want to talk about?
Sure. Well, I thought we'd start with the old adage that good fences make good neighbors. We all remember the old Robert Frost poem that often brought up in these types of conversations, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of going through some old law school materials, and I came across one of my favorite old cases that actually just happened a few years ago. It's the case of Klein versus Bird. And this was out in Augusta County, Virginia. And Mr. Klein decided to sue Mr. Berg because Mr. Berg constructed a 32-foot fence along their property line using utility poles and stringing saran wrap between the utility poles. And so Mr. Klein decided to sue Mr. Berg to have him take down the fence as a nuisance, essentially, violating his right to enjoy his property, blocking his view, and things like that. But there was a problem. It seems like Mr. Berg, the reason that he put the fence up was because his neighbor had erected an 11-foot tall tripod, which he had strung motion detector lights all about, that when every time someone moved on the adjoining property, floodlights would shine into their house. And so really this 32-foot fence was constructed to block the floodlights that the neighbor had constructed. And the reason that the neighbor had constructed the floodlights on the 11-foot tower, because he was annoyed that his other neighbor had just ambient light that was coming from his property into his house. So, this type of thing, really escalated to the point where, we had a 32-foot fence made of saran wrap facing an 11-foot tripod with motion detector floodlights. And so, it was one of those situations where the court actually came in and did not award relief to the plaintiff because of a doctrine that they call unclean hands. Basically, they said you can't really compel someone or seek damages from someone if you really didn't have a part in sort of having this whole thing escalate. So if you sort of get into a one of those sitcom type wars with your neighbors where each is trying to outdo each other, the court's likely not to award relief to either one of you for under the unclean hands doctrine.
Oh my gosh. So it's almost like you're not going to get recess that day. I mean, it's almost that's silly, right? I mean, why can't people just be smarter about it and get along?
Yeah.
Wow.
But you had the picture up there, and a lot of people do ask about fences.
Yeah, I was going to put it back. I realized that it wasn't about that case, but let me go ahead and put that picture back up, and you can talk to that. Oopsie, wrong picture. Sorry. There you go.
There we go. Yeah. So fences themselves, often cause problems in neighborhoods. I've dealt with a client who had a situation where they built a fence and the neighbor was unhappy about the fence, and they tried to compel the client to take the fence down, claiming that it was too high based on a restrictive covenant. Of course, if you went around the neighborhood and you realized that this type of fence was pretty much in every single yard in the neighborhood, you could sort of make the argument that covenant really wouldn't be enforced by any court of law. And that's pretty common around here, because if you go and pull the restrictive covenants on land use that were constructed when these neighborhoods were platted, again, back in the 50s and 60s, you find there's a lot of odd things on the books that have just been ignored for years and years and years. So a lot of times that these covenants would be struck down by the courts is because they just haven't been consistently enforced in the neighborhood. It actually turned out that this particular person who was trying to compel one neighbor to take down their own fence had a very similar similar fence on his own property. So he didn't have unclean hands himself. He just wanted to. But the thing about fences is you have to be careful, that they don't encroach on your neighbor's property. Fences, you have every right in most cases to construct a reasonable fence as long as they're on the property line. If they're found to be encroaching into another neighbor's property, the courts can force them to take the fence down. Which means that you're out of some cash there, and you don't want that to happen.
Right. And defense.
There's one interesting scenario with fences, though, is that you can actually compel your neighbors, if you choose to buy a fence or build a fence, you can go back and demand payment for them for a portion of the costs if they don't object to the fence in writing upon proper notice. So I came across a case recently where um, an attorney, of course, constructed a fence, sent a notice to each of his neighbors that he was going to construct the fence, never heard anything, sent them a bill about a month later. When they refused to pay the bill, he took them to court, and the courts ruled in his favor, saying that they received proper notice, failed to object to the construction of the fence, and were liable to pay for a portion of its cost.
Did his notice indicate that he was going to ask them for payment?
Nope. His notice just indicated that he intended to build the fence.
That just seems wrong.
Right, right. Well, again, in these types of situations, we get into in the fact patterns all the time. Where what type of enjoyment do you have in life if you're constantly battling?
I guess
You really
yeah.
care about getting along with your neighbors, or at least living side by side peacefully. Those types of moves are not encouraged. But just be aware out there, if someone sends you a notice that they plan on building a fence, that you may get stuck with a bill for it unless you actively object.
What an awkward situation, because you don't want to object to the neighbor building the fence, but that's just
Right.
it doesn't. I'm shocked that was legal, that they had to pay, and
Yeah. And again, it goes all the way back to the English common law, and it's it's part of. I think that the court, and this was a couple of years ago, cited a case from 1907 or something like that as the precedent.
Wow, that's insane. Okay, well, good to know, Paul. If I ever get a letter like that, I'm calling you. You can tell me what to do about it. Well, Mary just had a good question. She said, "Did the neighbors?" She says, "Why did the neighbors owe part of the fence?" And I also want to know. So, does that mean that the people owned the part of the fence, and they were then able to take down the part of the fence that was on their own property, if they wanted to, or hang signs on it, or manipulate it in any way?
So I've actually seen a lot of situations where the neighbors in protest have essentially not taken the fence down because no, they don't have the right to do that.
Right.
But I've seen situations where neighbors have come and painted different fence panels in bright neon colors, or done some weird sort of decorations and gaudy type stuff in retaliation. So there are certainly things that have sort of escalated.
It doesn't feel like a neighborly thing to do, to make the people pay for the fence. One more question. Marilyn said, "Okay, years ago we put up a fence. Elderly neighbors knew and provided partial payment. 4 neighbors later, the new folks said it's my fence, and any issues with the fence, part of it is falling, is her financial responsibility." Is that true? If there's damage to that fence, who's liable?
So again, this is a situation where technically you can take down the fence, build a new fence, and if you go through the sort of proper procedures of notifying the neighbors that you plan on it, if they don't object, okay, then they can be liable for payment. If they do object, or they basically give advance notice that they don't intend to pay for, any kind of repairs or anything like that, then they're not liable. So it's really kind of, ask in advance, and if they say no, they give proper sort of objections in this scenario, then you're kind of stuck with the situation.
Wow.
I need to replace my fence. I say this, I look at my lean-to fence out there.
Yeah. Mary had a question at the beginning of the show that I meant to ask you. She said, "If I planted trees on my own property line 20 years ago, but the owner never objected, do the new homeowners have the right to bulldoze my trees?" if they
So
were.
that's actually a topic that we're going to get to in just a minute.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Well, why don't you take us to the next one, and Mary, hold tight. We'll get to it. Go ahead, Paul.
Where were we? Let's. Can you
We
bring up the
were.
next slide?
Yes, yes, I can. The next slide is the poor little house with the tree on it.
There we go. Good segue. That's actually
That's
the next.
right.
So encroaching vegetation. This is a scenario, particularly in older neighborhoods like we have around here, that people ask me about all the time. Innocent trees that were planted next to the property line 20 years ago now are massive oak trees that are taking over the next door neighbor's land. You've got hanging branches that are encroaching into the yard. You've got root systems that are growing underneath neighbors' driveways all the time and churning them up and making them crack and causing damages and those types of things. And the question is, what can we do here? Now, of course, the neighborly thing to do is go talk to your neighbor and say, can I get a tree service? You want to split the cost? I'll be happy to do that with you. But sometimes people just say, screw it, it's not my problem, it's your problem, it's my tree, it's on my property, so on and so forth. The basic the basic rule in Virginia, and they actually call it the Hawaii rule because it comes from Hawaii, is that you can essentially make and cut down any vegetation up to the property line. And that includes bulldozing and doing root systems and all that kind of stuff. So you can essentially go to your fence line and cut from the fence line straight up any type of trees or branches or anything like that that's encroaching onto your property. And you can also dig out the roots from any tree that's kind of encroaching onto your property. So, that often
Interesting.
begs the question.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm so
Well,
curious. Would that mean that if it damaged the tree, would then you'd be liable for that? Could they?
so
Or,
no, not particularly if the rule on that is if you can make a reasonable argument that the tree has either already caused damage to your property
Mhm.
or is is causing imminent danger. So if you can take, pictures and show fallen branches and say, look, this thing is half dead and it's about to go over. So the standard is imminent danger. And a lot of these questions, and these are sort of gray, fuzzy type areas. Well, how
Yeah,
do I
they are.
get it? I mean, here's what the law says. Um, you know, a lot of times it basically is up to a jury. So, so many times we get in a situation where you have these types of disputes. A very small percentage of these types of arguments actually end up in court in front of a jury. But, it does happen. Hopefully, you can sort of settle the dispute with your neighbor. Someone can, even if you file a lawsuit, oftentimes you can sit down and settle the lawsuit before it goes to trial. But a lot of times, if it does go to trial, it's just a question of fact. And you
Right.
have all these, little rules: what's reasonable versus what's unreasonable. What is imminent danger? What is unclean hands? What is?
Hmm.
We'll talk about the common enemy in a minute when we're talking about water. And a lot of these questions, and a lot of these answers, essentially, are questions of fact that are decided by juries.
Boy,
And
and
that
that's a real
holds
tough. But that's a tough gamble because you never know how a jury is gonna think or hear what you're saying. I mean, there's an interpretation. I mean, there's so many variables that can happen once it goes to a jury. So, but I
yeah,
would imagine if just even filing the suit at least makes the plaintiff or I'm sorry, the defendant realize that you mean business. So
yeah. And then the plaintiff or the defendant says, okay, will it be less money for me to, solve the problem,
right.
or, hire an attorney to basically defend me in a court of law. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, again, we talked about at the beginning, you know, can I fix a problem for $500 rather than spending $5,000 to try to
Yeah.
defend a lawsuit?
Yeah.
It's
And take a vacation instead with the
go
money.
pay tree service, a couple of grand to take care of something that I probably should have taken care of in the first place. I've seen situations where people have gotten arborists involved, they've gotten soil engineers involved. Um, but at the end of the day, if that person's vegetation is encroaching on your property and you feel uh, that, if one of these branches fall, they're going to damage my fence, they're going to damage my garage, they're going to damage my
Yeah.
house, they're going to damage my car, or they're going to damage a person. I mean,
Yeah.
what if my kids are out playing in the backyard, a big
Right.
gust of wind comes by, and this guy's, half dead branch falls down and hurts, my child?
Right. Right.
you know,
Right.
so-
No, it makes sense. Lucille O'Flaherty of the Zebra family. Hi, Lucille. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Actually shared a great story. Her friend had a chain link fence that they loved as a secure fence for their small dog. The new neighbors wanted a privacy fence. Friend said she didn't care what she wanted to do. She didn't authorize the removal of her chain link fence, so the neighbor built the privacy fence just right next to the chain link fence, and everybody was happy. So that's a story with a happy
I've
ending.
seen that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
that
and you do
happens,
see
all the time.
fences on that. To me, that seems to make more sense anyway. So, if you want that
It
fence, go ahead
solves the
and build
problem.
it.
I mean, the
Mhm.
person can't go take down your chain link fence as long as it's, in, there's no rules or covenants or homeowners
Right,
association. As long as it's legal,
right.
and as long as it's, on the proper boundary of the home,
Hmm.
um, you know, if they want a privacy fence and they want to build it right next to the chain link fence, when I was putting this together today, I came across actually several pictures of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that seems to make a lot more sense. Okay, so the common enemy. Should we move on to the common enemy?
Yes.
All
Yes.
right, let me get that picture up there. And that would be water.
Water.
Ugh.
uh, yes, indeed. This is kind of an extreme picture, but obviously, again, a very common issue that we have in our neighborhood where we have shifting elevations, we have low lying plains, we have heavy storms, and we also sort of, live on the water, whether it's the creek and the river, there's groundwater and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of times, people are upset and feel that neighbors are diverting their ground, or not their ground, their surface water from their own property to an adjacent neighbor's property. Okay. And so, I've come across situations where people say, you know, and this usually happens when someone makes some sort of improvements to their land. Okay.
Hmm.
Someone comes in and they want to build an addition, they want to build a garage, they want to, put in a new fence, they want to remove vegetation. And, sometimes that basically changes the direction of the surface water and causes it to seep onto another person's property. So in the Commonwealth of Virginia, they have what's called the common enemy principle, which states that surface water is a common enemy, and property owners may take reasonable measures to divert standing surface water from their property. And if those reasonable measures result in some of that water seeping and pouring onto an adjacent landowner's property, then so be it. However, there are also exceptions to the rule. And therein the key word there is reasonable. So there have been recent cases where the court has found that if neighbors do things like strip a ton of vegetation or dig ditches or trenches that directly divert the water onto a neighbor's property, those are deemed unreasonable,
Yeah.
and they can be liable for the damages that are caused there. So there's like a whole
Hmm.
list of things. And again, the definition of reasonable or unreasonable, there's a list of sort of actions, again, vegetation, um, creating obstructions to, intentionally divert, water. I've seen a situation where, someone had a bobcat out and literally like dug a trench through, from their garage down the slope of their property and diverted it into a neighbor's property who was, below. And, this person, next thing you know, every time they get any kind of significant storm, caused significant damage from flooding
Oh,
to their yard, to their vegetation, to their house, and all that kind of stuff. So be careful. Again, a lot of people, if you go and, you know, grading projects probably just fine. A lot of people like to go in and put a French drain to drain the, water down to the
mm-hmm.
curb and things like that. But don't be careless. Certainly don't
Right,
be overtly negligent by uh, doing the types of things that could cause
right.
real damage. Um,
Yeah, I mean, there's the water issues are big around here because of the river. I mean, up in the city, there's in the city of Alexandria, there's lots of issues recently with water problems and Marilyn, thank you again, Marilyn. She has a situation for this. She said, "Okay, Paul, a neighbor built a semi underground pool. When it rains, I now have a semi creek pouring down my property. Probably not intentional water diversion. I called the county and they said there was no permit, but because it's behind a tall fence, the county can't verify the pool, and so the neighbors cannot be charged. What's her recourse? Boy, she seems like she should be able to do something."
Right. I mean, if you put, a lot of times the first people do is they call the county, and if there was a proper permit, can the county go in and uh, you know figure out if there's you know some violation of local ordinances and things like that, and if they come in and they do that, and then they can cause the person to remedy the problem. I've seen a lot of neighbors do this in these types of situations, and a lot of times, the response that they get from the county, particularly if it's a dispute between neighbors, is this is a civil matter. Take it up with the judge.
Oh,
So if the county's not sort of, intervening to your satisfaction, then the question you have to ask yourself is, can I somehow prove that this action by my neighbor, brings, rises to the level where I can bring a claim for
mm-hmm.
damages. So does the can you sort of prove that the construction of this sub pool or indoor whatever it was is causing the damage? Were they acting unreasonably? That's probably a tough one.
Yeah,
That's kind of a tough one to prove in that situation, unless you can really sort of find out, really sort of come up with some sort of evidence that the neighbor breached their, duty to essentially prevent, unreasonable, damage
boy,
to.
yeah, that's a tough one. I think Marilyn was hoping for a better answer.
But you never know. A lot of times, sometimes these types of things take a little bit of investigation.
Yeah. No, and,
Um,
and, and people can do something to their house, and through no fault of their own, it causes, undue like a surprise that it causes a problem, and then they're not really at fault. It wasn't, as Marilyn said, it wasn't intentional, but there's
right.
still damage has been caused, and so you feel like in your right angle mind of good versus
Hmm.
bad that there should be, an easier fix than just be like, oh,
Right.
that's really a bummer, so.
Yeah. And if they haven't violated any laws, if they haven't acted in an unreasonable manner, if what they've done is something that a reasonable property owner would do in a normal situation, it's kind of tough to get an injunction or to get
Yeah.
to win for damages or
Yeah.
repair. And in these types of situations, the best first step is always to see if you can have some sort of good relationship with your neighbor, and
Right.
talk
Yeah.
over the problem and see if you can, mitigate the issue. You'll find that a lot of neighbors are good-hearted people, and
Yep.
they feel like they're responsible. That a lot of times people can work out some sort of solution where
Sure.
the cost of
Yep.
negating the problem. So,
Yeah, yeah, and
hopefully,
get to know your neighbors before problems start, right? I mean, if there's
yeah,
one, nice thing about the pandemic, I think people know their neighbors a little bit better now because everybody has to get the heck out of the house every once in a while, and you can see people walking around, and so, okay, let's move on to number 4, and this unfortunate, nobody wants to see this in the neighborhood, that's for sure.
yes, the crack house. This is just an example of another issue that we mentioned before, because sometimes there can be nuisance issues. So, a lot of the issues that we've talked about are sort of, can be considered sort of trespass to one's property. When we think of trespassing as, someone, physically being on someone else's property without permission, but, you know, trespass can also be a physical invasion of the property by the neighbor, through, again, encroaching vegetation, surface water, other things like that. But a lot of times we have nuisance activity that basically interfere with someone's right to enjoy their property. And
Right,
a lot of this has to do with the old laws that deal with, illicit use of drugs, prostitution, so, brothels, things like that next door.
right,
Basically, if there is ongoing illegal activity, or activity that could be considered um, prurient. And we talked about, the nudist, and there's actually
right.
a ton of cases on whether or not someone can walk around in their yard naked, um, which usually actually the courts find that they can, as long as they're not being perverted, so to speak.
Okay.
That's a family show, but
Ah,
the, but there is a nuisance cause of action when there's since essentially adjacent properties that have these things that basically interfere with your ability to go about your daily business, and a lot of people have sort of successfully
yeah.
sued.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and
yeah.
also, and this is a little bit of an offshoot of that, but when you have a house like that in the neighborhood, and it seems to me a no-brainer that if there's illegal activity going on, then you have a recourse right there to do something about it. But what about a house that is just blight? I mean, what can you do? Or somebody leaves a car rotting away and there's trees growing out of it, or a
Yeah.
pool where there's trees growing out of maybe in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and uh, so
Is there a
those
blight
are hard
rule?
ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and usually the first recourse that you have in those situations is the county and the local ordinances. If you live out in a rural area, or even in a regular neighborhood, there's not a lot you can do unless there's really, you can show that there's some nuisance going on that has caused you, again, impeded your ability to enjoy the use of your own property. It's difficult to sort of establish a claim for damages, but that's oftentimes where the local government steps in.
Mm-hmm.
Fairfax County has a book of ordinances that apply to landowners. This thick. There's again, there's usually restricted covenants that you may be able to find. There's homeowners associations if you live in one of those. So that's kind of the first place that I would turn. So,
That makes
calling
sense.
the county,
Yeah.
calling someone to do that kind of thing. I mean, they've had, lots of issues around here. Again,
Yeah.
the county has limits on the number of cars that you can have at one home, and
Yeah.
how many people can occupy a single residence based
Mm-hmm.
on square footage, and the maintenance of one's property so as not to cause pollution and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the causes that that comes up sometimes is this claim for diminution of value. You know, this person is basically acting in a way that now my property is worth
Sure.
less.
And that's a
Um,
valid
and-
claim, I would imagine. You know.
yeah, and sometimes that claim can be made, but you really have to prove that they've really sort of violated some sort of law
Ah,
that's on the books, whether it's a common law or a statutory law or something like
gotcha.
that. Um, they're just you can't claim that they're just disagreeable people or something
Right.
like that.
Right. Yeah, it's just, so many of these are just unfortunate situations. And it seems to me also that sometimes when a property is gone, grass has gotten too long. And Lucille just pointed out that in Alexandria, if the weeds are too tall, the city will give them time to fix before finding them. But sometimes it's just because the person is elderly or they've been
Right.
injured and they just,
Yeah. You don't know the
they can't,
circumstances.
so, and again, being neighborly, it's, if you can give a hand up, I mean, that's, it would be nice thing to do before it kind of gets ugly, kind of
Right.
recognizing where everybody is coming from. Let's move on to noise nuisances. Here's a noise nuisance because what if you have this awesome rock band in your neighborhood?
Exactly. So these are a lot of folks will recognize OMB, better known as the Old Man Band, a local band who actually I use them as an example, but they are very responsible individuals when it comes to they're playing locally. But you do get into situations where noise emitting from someone else's property, whether it's the garage band or the barking dog or any kind of loud music, the kids playing the stereo too loud and all that kind of stuff. What do you do in these situations? Can I sue my neighbor for this? Well, first of all, noise ordinances are local statutes. So Fairfax County actually has again, I go back to that nice code in Fairfax County and the city of Alexandria as well, and pretty much any town and that's semi-urban or suburban is going to have sort of noise statutes in place, that can be enforced. They actually have a chart that says, from the hours of 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. you can have 65 decibels of noise coming from your property.
Oh,
After between 7 p.m. And midnight, it can be 60. Between midnight and 7 a.m. They actually have ordinances when rules on sort of when you can run equipment, run your lawnmower, fix your car, what time of the day and how loud things are going to be. So if, the first thing to do if someone is you think in violation of a local noise ordinance, this actually can become a criminal matter.
oh,
So you can call the police. They can show up to someone's house. And if they can demonstrate that that you're in violation of the local ordinance, you can be arrested, charged with a misdemeanor, so on and so forth. You don't. Obviously, you want to protect your rights, and things like that, and you want to be considerate to your neighbors when it comes to noise and things like
right.
that. But oftentimes there are also it can become a civil matter.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the sort of my dog barks, after midnight, or I was reading a case where it involved a woman who had 10 dogs who barked all night,
Oh,
and so the neighbor was able to basically successfully sue under sort of the nuisance theory
uh-huh.
that that there was damages to that person's ability to enjoy
Did
their
the neighbor
property.
win? Did the neighbor
And
win?
yeah, the neighbor won. So they I think in Virginia you can actually claim up to $500 per instance, and so if something has been going on for a significant period of time, you can at least make the argument that the damages are fairly significant. 'Cause,
Right.
but,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's,
you-
and again, that's just so unfortunate that it has to get to that point, I guess I know everybody knows it's tough to handle a barking dog, but there are measures you can take to
right,
decrease it,
right,
and it is your responsibility. So
especially
nobody
in the
wants.
middle of
Yes, exactly. Nobody wants to hear a barking dog. You don't want it to wake your baby or wake your kids or you. You
the
know, you
night.
got to work it. Got to go to work in the morning. So.
I hope you just didn't hear my barking dog in there, by the way.
No,
I
I did not. I did
apologize.
not. Okay, and then I think our final slide here is and this is an interesting picture. This is this boundary violation.
Right, right. So yeah, I threw this in there because I thought it was funny, but you know, uh, yeah, we could talk for hours about property lines and boundary disputes and those types of things. Obviously, these things are controlled by surveys. Sometimes people find that they've been living on their land for years, and that the boundary line actually was further away or somewhere different. And there's all kinds of concepts called adverse possession, where you can actually claim title to the land if no one else has claimed it, and so on and so forth. But this is a situation where a property owner found that the adjoining neighbor, this is actually in the state of Maine, an adjoining neighbor had erected a garage that spilled on over into the other neighbor's property. So they solved the problem by taking a chainsaw and sawing off half of the other neighbor's house.
I was gonna say it looked like it was just cut in half. So the property owner just chopped off because but had he just woke up one morning and had it? I mean, it just seems like he waited till it was built, or maybe he had moved in. Who knows, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah, and those cases, that always is sort of the worst nightmare scenario, to find that you've actually went to the extent to build some structure on a property that's not on your property, and as long as the neighbor can prove that they have title to that property, they can force you to take it down. The other scenario, of course, that we see all the time is if you build something that's in violation of Fairfax County, or the City of Alexandria building codes, and the county or the city comes and makes you take it out. I've seen this a lot with sheds that are too close to the property line, and things like that. Usually houses are fine, but sometimes additions get in the problem.
Right.
So make sure that you're not you know where your boundary lines are before you build, and know what the local codes and ordinances are, so you can avoid having to chainsaw half your garage down.
And a lot of especially the homeowners associations, they do advise you, before you do any building or make any changes, let us see the plans, and it is a little frustrating.
Well, we have permits.
Well, yeah, exactly. But it is a little frustrating to be like, well, it's my house. I can do what I want in my house. But, I guess there are, rules and laws you got to live by. Right? So, is that everything? Did you
that
have any more?
Pretty much wraps it up. Again, in conclusion, the best first advice that I would give anybody is to really try your best to sit down with that pesky neighbor and see if you can iron things out peacefully. But sometimes when it can't be done, know your rights. Call me or call any attorney around that explain your situation, and I'm sure they'll give you their honest opinion on whether or not it's whether you have a claim, and how valuable your claim might be, and really weigh the risks.
It's all about weighing the risks. We have another question from Twin State Aggie. Thank you for your question. And it says, in Alexandria City, the neighbor's tree is very close to my fence, and it's uprooting the fence. The fence is being pushed out from the bottom. Is there anything that the homeowner can do?
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, I mean, you have the right to remedy that situation up to your property line. So, you can, any vegetation that's overhanging your fence, you can cut, straight up in a straight line over there. The root system, I mean, it's not fun, but you can, dig down and basically, knock out any roots that are crossing onto your property.
But you would be responsible for any of those costs, even if the tree is on their property, that part that's on your property that you can cut if you want to, but you have to find somebody who can, it's expensive to get a tree guy in there to do that.
Yeah, and hopefully again you can talk to your neighbor and see if they might be willing to sort of split the cost or something like that. But those are situations that are always tough in these older neighborhoods where the trees are just so big and the root systems are so big, and sometimes you just you can take matters in your own hand, but that creates your
or a chainsaw into your own hands, but Probably best to get a professional to do it. Well, Paul Dean, thank you as always. Your wonderful, your legal expertise is always very factual, well researched, and we definitely appreciate the information. This was a subject that a lot of people were interested in. So thanks so much for coming on. And I want to say, sure, of course, and I want to say Happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. I hope you have a good day tomorrow. I wore my shamrock tie.
Oh, good for you. I was going to wear this and I forgot, but I have a new shamrock mask for tomorrow. Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, from my husband. So that's a nice one. So, all right, Paul, we'll let you go. Thank you so much.
All right.
And we'll see you. All right, we'll see you in another month. Okay. Right. So that's Paul Dean in Legal Matters. Always such a great source of information. If you have any questions, you can reach Paul. He's online. His website is www.pjd-law.com, and you can also find him on Facebook at the Law Offices of Paul J. Dean. Tomorrow night, ZTV is taking the day off for St. Patrick's Day. We're all going to go drink some green water or green beer, maybe green wine. But we're going to enjoy the day tomorrow. So we hope that you enjoy the night as well. But please join us back here on Thursday night. It's the Virginia Amos Show at 7 p.m. And Virginia's guest is Agnes Artemel of the Old Town North Arts Alliance. So please tune in and meet Agnes and learn all about what they're doing up there in Old Town North. It's a great neighborhood up there. Thanks everybody so much for tuning in to ZTV. Remember, as much as you can, to be the good news in someone's life.